Good morning, everybody. I'm happy to introduce and give the floor to Delma Rodriguez, Director of Anillo Cultural and Local Network. She will be the moderator of the Public Policies panel. You have the floor. Thank you very much for introducing the start of the panel. To me, it's an honor being able to meet with these dear guests and that make up a conglomerate of culture, education, and technology. So I want to thank especially Riane, Carlos Casasus, Santiago Rincon-Gallardo for accepting the invite and for accepting the conditions to meet all at some point. So thank you all for the effort. I will make a short introduction to what we understand of why doing this panel of public policies in this Congress. Well, during the pandemic, we've had to instrument different public policies that are specific to help education and culture in the short term. How much, or has it worked or not, these public policies or these measures? We still don't have a clear idea on these results. But the problem of public policies in this situation of pandemic has helped to support different emergency situations that we're living today. And also, we see that public policies need designs and proposals that are not only to help during the crisis, but that they generate future things, that they generate other scenarios in short, mid, and long term. That's why, with different regional and global experiences, we can ask ourselves, how do public policies integrate the teaching role, education, and distance and the internet, which are the panels that you will see in the 2 days of the Congress. But also, we see that we need an exclusive space for analysis and proposals to think about public policies. That's why the 3 panelists of this round have their profiles with very rich trajectories in culture, education, technology, and public management. Not only will they analyze what we learned in the pandemic, but also they will give us keys, valuable keys for the cultural transformation, innovation in education, and the synergies, the productive synergies that are necessary for collaborative networks and to build especially local and global improvements. And why not a better world? So let's welcome again. We're honored for having here these 3 speakers. And as you already know, we will be introducing our guests through a drawing, an animated drawing, a time lapse that our collaborators have made. We will introduce Riane Eisler, who will be, her drawing will be playing by Carlos Lemus. We want to thank him for being able to generate this beauty that will introduce Riane Eisler. Riane, Dr. Riane, has received the award to the Distinguished Peace Leadership that was also given to the Dalai Lama, and she's internationally known for her innovative contributions as a scientist of system futurist and historian. She's author of the book Chalice and the Blade, that of course we recommended especially, and also Real Wealth of Nations. This book of Real Wealth of Nations has been acclaimed by Desmond Tutu, Nobel Prize Award recipient, and he said it's a model for the better world that we have been seeking so urgently and for so long. Another of her important books is Nurturing Our humankind. We recommend all of these books that will generate a lot of contribution to you. Her documents and her pioneer work offer new perspectives to build future societies that are less violent and more equal, balanced on gender and sustainable. Riane is president of Center for Partnership Systems. She's head editor of the Interdisciplinary Studies magazine, and she's a distinguished teacher that offers PhDs and masters based on social scale of collaboration domination that she has generated. All her theory of cultural transformation. Welcome, Riane. Thank you for your legacy, and thank you for being with us, and especially because this legacy will keep enlightening to many generations ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you, Delma. As you know, our topic is foundations for partnership public policies. But first, I would like to start on a personal note, because as those of you familiar with my work know, I have a great deal of passion for positive policy and social change. And that passion is deeply rooted in my childhood experiences as a child refugee from Nazi Europe with my parents, which in terms of the new conceptual framework that I've introduced was a massive regression to a rigid domination system. Now, that trauma led me to questions that I'm sure many of you have asked at some point in your lives. When we humans have such an enormous capacity for consciousness, for caring, for creativity, why has there been so much insensitivity, cruelty, and destructiveness? Is this inevitable, or are there alternatives? And these questions eventually led to my multidisciplinary, cross-cultural whole systems research, which focuses not only on deconstruction, but on reconstruction. And specifically, it focuses on identifying the core components of societies that support our positive human capacities, and on how we can build these kinds of societies. Now, my whole systems approach, and could you switch, please? Oh, I see, they're all there. Okay, we're going to go to la escala social de dominación y colaboración. All right, so my whole new systems approach identified two social configurations, and these are configurations that go beyond conventional social categories that we're all used to, like right, left, religious, secular, Eastern, Western, and so forth. The domination social configuration and the partnership social configuration. And what this lens, this new lens of the partnership domination social scale reveals is the relationship between our intimate childhood and gender relations on the one hand, and politics and economics on the other, and of course, education, media, etc. And it shows that we have to look at the whole picture, the whole system, if we are to build a society that is more peaceful, sustainable, and equitable. Now, for example, using this new lens, we can see that the progressive social movements of modern times have all challenged the same thing, a tradition of domination. The Enlightenment in the 17th century challenged the so-called divine right of kings to rule over their subjects. The feminist movement challenged the, again, so-called divinely ordained right of men to rule over women and children. The abolitionist civil rights Black rights movement, Black Rights Matter movements challenge the, again, so-called divinely ordained right of a, quote, superior race to rule over, quote, inferior ones, all the way to the environmental movement, challenging our once idealized conquest and domination of nature. But these movements focus primarily on dismantling the top of the domination pyramid, politics and economics as conventionally defined. And they paid far, far less attention to four interconnected foundations of either domination or partnership systems. The first cornerstone foundation is childhood, because we know that from neuroscience that what children experience and observe, especially in their first 5 years, shapes nothing less than the architecture of our brains. And with this, how we think, how we feel, how we act, including how we vote. The second cornerstone, again, is one that we are not used to thinking of as a core social issue, is gender. Consider that ranking the male form of our species over the female form. What does it tell us? What does it tell a child? It is a template for equating difference with superiority or inferiority, dominating or being dominated, being served or serving, and hence it's a template for all in-group versus out-group prejudices and rankings, be it racism, anti-Semitism, and so forth. The third cornerstone is economics, but economics that goes beyond both capitalism and socialism, because consider that current economic systems, both capitalist and socialist, fail to properly value and reward the most fundamental human work, the work of caring for people and for nature. And the fourth cornerstone, and they're all interconnected, is story and language. Consider that many of the stories we are told today that are our heritage from more rigid domination times present violence, domination as normal and inevitable. So it is on these foundations, these domination foundations in childhood, gender, economics, and story language, that domination systems of strongman rule and violence have kept rebuilding themselves in regression after regression. For example, Putin, a strong man ruler who launched his barbaric invasion of Ukraine, he also in 2017 radically reduced the penalty, the legal penalty for family violence. So it is today substantially less in Russia than for hurting or killing a stranger. Why? Because of the link between an authoritarian and male-dominated punitive family and an authoritarian male-dominated violent state. Nothing to do with women and men. We're talking about stereotypes now. And this connection is also visible through the partnership domination biocultural lens in other contemporary regressions to domination, whether Nazi Germany, I was born into that massive regression, which is a Western secular society, religious societies like the Taliban, ISIS, Khomeini's Iran, Eastern societies, In all of these, think about it, the subordination of women in a male-dominated, punitive family is a top priority. There's a reason for this. Now, progressive public policy, education, and media must also recognize and also educate others to recognize this connection if we are to build the foundations for a better world. We must educate people to move to a caring economics of partnerism, where the so-called women's work of caring for people starting at birth and the work of caring for our natural life support systems is truly valued and properly rewarded. And for this, we need new metrics, new measures that show this value instead of the current GNP, GDP, which include as productive activities, actually activities that harm and even take life. For example, selling cigarettes and the resulting medical costs, resulting funeral costs, they all make GDP go up. And a stand of trees, which we need to breathe, it's only included in GDP and GNP if it's dead, if it's a log. So at the Center for Partnership Systems, we are developing this metric, the Social Wealth Index, so that policymakers in both business, in government, in education, in media, have the information they need to accelerate the shift from domination to partnership systems. And the good news is that we have models of partnership-oriented societies, because we know today from archaeology, from mythology, from DNA studies even, that for millennia, we humans lived in societies that orient more to domination, to partnership than to domination. And this is evidence is detailed in my books, especially in The Chalice and the Blade. Now, we also know that we can create the tools we need to support policies that can move us from domination to partnership systems. And these tools include: one, changing how we measure economic health; two, demonstrating that supporting care work can cut through cycles of poverty; three, implementing a cohesive family policy where care work, still done for free, primarily by women in families, is rewarded, such as affordable and well-paid, high-quality early child care, generous paid parental leave, early childhood education, etc. For sharing evidence that investing in caring for people and nature is good for business and society. And five, and this is vital, recognizing that economic systems are affected by and in turn affect the larger social system. Now, education and media have a major role and responsibility to accelerate this shift to a more equitable, less violent, more sustainable partnership future. I thank you. Thank you.
Gracias, profesora Eisler, por sus palabras.
Thank you, Professor Eisler, for your words, for summarizing how we can transform each other. There's nothing else to add. How we can transform ourselves. Thank you for the 4 cornerstones and the 5 steps in this cultural education transformation and for society. Thank you. Now, let's continue.
en el chat emitiendo el formulario de asistencia.
We have we're getting the attendees in the chat to issue the certificates. Okay. Now let's go to the presentation of Santiago Rincon-Gallardo. I'm sorry, Carlos Casasus. We're here in the order of the guests. Okay, so let's share. First, let's share his presentation from Carlos Casasus through this drawing, this animated drawing that is another beauty also made by Carlos Lemos, that made this animation of Carlos Casasus. And he studied his BS in Business Administration in Universidad Iberoamericana, and he got his master's in Business Administration in Harvard. From 1976 to 1991, he worked at Teléfonos de México, where he had different roles, including Director of Administration and Finance during the privatization process of this company. In 1994, he was appointed a Deputy Secretary of Communications and Technological Development of the Ministry of Communications and Transports. In 1996, he was appointed as head of the Federal Telecommunications Commission of the government of Mexico. Since 1999, he's the General Director of the Universitary Corporation for the Development of Internet, known as CUDI, that manages the National Network of Education and Investigation in Mexico. He was president of the board of directors of the Latin American Corporation of Academic Networks, known as Red Clara, in different periods, 2008, 2009, 15 to 19, and from 2011 to 2013, he was the president of the consultative board of the Federal Telecommunications Commission. He's president of the board of directors of the Consortium for the Interchange of Internet Traffic that operates the first IXP in Mexico. He also has been a teacher, the master's in administration at ITAM for over 15 years. Thank you, Carlos, for being with us. You're a whole figure on telecom. Yesterday, that was the day before yesterday, the Internet Day. So having you here is an honor. Telecom academic networks, your work in public policies. Go ahead, Carlos. Thank you very much. You're muted. Thank you very much for your introduction, and I'm delighted for participating with you. I want to share my screen, if I may. You could do it, Carlos. No, I can't. Can you do it now? No. It's one participant at a time. Okay, give me a second. Let's see. I'll have you as a host. I think I can start talking. Let's see. No, not yet. Okay, finally. Obviously, it caught my attention, and I'll talk about my personal history here. I have been a telecom man that somehow ended up working for the National Network of Research, basically trying to have better conditions of connectivity in Mexican colleges. Basically, my work as a regulator of telecom, we think that telecom should go from a public asset to a private asset. That's the one where its owner is a person or private institution and has the right to enjoy it exclusively. Consumption by a person avoids or reduces availability of consumption for others. For example, tortilla. If I eat a tortilla, nobody else can eat it. It's a private asset. And let's say the trend in regulation of telecom was privatize the state monopoly system of telecom, because this led to a spectacular growth of telecom. And on the other side, we have the topic of public assets. From a legal point of view, the one that belongs or is provided by the government at any levels through all the organisms that are part of the public sector. From the economic point of view, it's an asset that is available for everybody. It's not exclusive, and from which the use by a person does not mean the other person cannot use it. For example, public safety. It's not an asset that is consumed by a specific person. It exists or not. Providing public assets should be done by the government. Public policies are related with public assets. What has happened with education? Education, we can think that it could be a private asset. However, there has been a decision, a political decision in most countries in the world that have made it into a mandatory service. We have to study elementary school, junior school, high school, free, and it is universally available, provided by the government. Therefore, it has become a public asset with all its characteristics. And as I was saying, it has been a political decision in our countries that the government provides education. At least, although they provide most education in Latin American states. The new education reality is that the pandemic forced non-presential education, however, and I think this is key. In most of our countries, this transformation was done without solving the connectivity issue. Many students did not have access to connectivity and the necessary devices to attend classes. If they did it using the cell phone, they couldn't even see the full screen, that they had interruption, and that was expensive. And the result has been a catastrophe, at least for Mexico. In Mexico, we're thinking that around 5.2 million kids and youngsters dropped school in school year 2020-2021 from 30-something million, so 32.9 million. So maybe 17-18% of students stopped attending school. And today in Mexico, where there are 54 million children and youngsters that have the right to go to school, paid by the government, today only 42 million attend. So 40% of our kids today don't go to school. As I was saying, connectivity was part of the problem. It wasn't solved. But now it has to be the solution. Education for the current times requires adopting information technologies mandatorily. They're the basis of a properly formed citizen for the 21st century in all disciplines. Education uses information technologies is better. And education that uses information technologies obviously is more efficient. Without education at distance, reinsertion to schools of all of these kids that dropped out is unthinkable. How we can give education to 20-something million kids if we don't do it with connectivity through remote education. And then the conclusion is that by being a public asset, education, the government is responsible also for solving connectivity. We cannot leave on hands of the market that connectivity of education to be covered exclusively by the market. There has to be a public policy that solves connectivity of our kids and our schools. And therefore, good government that prioritizes education with budget must also give a budget priority to connectivity in the current world. We require connectivity for kids and schools if we want to educate better. That's all from me. Thank you.
Gracias, Carlos, por
Thank you, Carlos, for mentioning the problem and the solution at the same time. I think it's a very interesting perspective. So we appreciate your contributions and we will discuss them. Now let's introduce Santiago Rincon-Gallardo through the time lapse, the drawing, who in this case, this was done by the illustrator Marcus Manzi, who we thank for generating this beautiful interface to introduce our guests. Santiago Rincon-Gallardo. He knows our reality, especially from Uruguay and many Latin American countries, because through his role as head of research in enterprise, he has contact with many governments in this regard. He studied math at UNAM. He has a PhD in educational policy, leadership, and pedagogic practice in Harvard. And he's author of many specialized articles and books that this Mexican expert also, he studied at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education in Toronto, Canada. He's also known for being part of the promoting team of the tutoring networks in Mexico. By the end of the 90s and start of this century, this mentoring generated in Mexico an amazing improvement in education performance of historically marginalized communities. So that has also been part of his profile, a promotion to keep in his research. We want to emphasize especially his latest book called Liberating Learning that focuses change, education change as a social movement. Thank you, Santiago, and go ahead with your presentation. Thank you very much, Delma. Thank you, Rainier and Carlos. It's a pleasure being here with you. I will focus the discussion of public policy around what I have been learning and what I have been doing in my work over the last 2 decades around basic education, public education. And as Delma was saying in this panel, it's just soon to know which education policies are working. And also knowing that the tax, the financial stimuli that were deployed all through the world to attend the pandemic, from this stimuli, only 3% was dedicated to education, and even less than 1% was dedicated globally. We can expect that there will not be many new things around education, but what we can start discovering is that there are certain efforts of education policy that were done before the pandemic that were seen as very promising and that now are even more relevant. We're talking about initiatives like the Mentorship Network in Mexico, Works in Colombia, Curriculum for Everyone in Scotland, that has a participative process, more focused on the partnership, collaboration, as Riane was saying in the beginning of her presentation. Counties like San Diego that we're working with in California that are working to reduce how this system, the poverty, the levels of poverty in their county with their kids and youngsters. So there are many efforts that are worth mentioning from which we can learn. And that it's not that they were developed as a consequence of the pandemic, but they were developing before, but now, in the times where we are right now, they become more relevant. I want to start by making a summary of what seems that will be the education public policies. According to the latest reports from UNESCO, McKinsey, OECD, all of these international agencies that have started analyzing the effects of the pandemic and have set some of the possible solutions. This is just, if we take these reports, if we consider these reports, there will be the priorities of education policies in the times ahead. One of them is the reincorporation and prevention of dropping out, the recovery and acceleration of learnings, connectivity, and ITCs, that will be another emphasis. And if we pay attention to the reports that are currently made on the education situation in different countries all over the world, well-being, social-emotional learning, equality, the pandemic showed that there are very old inequalities in our societies, and they were worse with the pandemic. Training teachers also, and school community partnerships, and the generation of information systems and education management. This seems to be, or will be, the emphasis in most public policies in education as a response to the pandemic. These 8 topics summarize where the eyes will be regarding public policy. Now, I want to say here, and I know that maybe this will generate controversy, but one of the problems that I see in the current discussions on education policy is that they seem to assume that what we have to do is trying to continue, fix what we were doing, and trying to continue more or less the same way with the low development model that brought us this far. Why is it important to mention this blind spot in the discussion around education policy? Because we're about to collapse, about the collapse in the environment, social policy. We're about to collapse. There's some reports on the conditions of climate change and the fact that we're already in the crisis. It will be hard to fix this deterioration that is coming. When we see the political, social, human deterioration, and environmental as well, that is happening in front of us, I think we have to wonder if what we actually have to do as educators as education policymakers is to continue moving ourselves where we were moving before the pandemic. We're going really fast into the cliff. If humankind were the Titanic, we already hit the iceberg. And most of the efforts that are being designed or considered for education policy are either just patch the holes that exist already in Titanic or creating a new Titanic, that in a world where icebergs are everywhere and that it will not be possible to avoid them. This is the context where we are. We're moving towards the catastrophe. The catastrophe already started developing. And then I think in moments like this, we have to wonder, what's the role of education? Educating for what? And honestly, I think keep thinking on educating to give to issue certificates, to teach for work. I mean, that's a promise and that's a discussion that is vain and will not save us until going to the cliff. What we have to do is to wonder, what do you educate for? And that's something that we have to ask collectively and personally. What do you educate for? And I will show here what I think should be the purposes of education. Not to convince you that they should be the ones, but to invite each of you and each of us collectively as well to ask ourselves, what do you educate for? And use this as a north to move forward the education policy that will take us there. That's what I want to start to propose here. What do you educate for? We can summarize the fundamental purposes of education, especially if we want to rebuild the human purpose, sustain life. I think education should be a vehicle that will help our kids, our youngsters, our boys, girls to do 4 things: to know each other, to learn and think by themselves, to take care of people and the planet, and to improve the world. I think this summarizes what education should be. What do you educate for? For our kids to know each other, that they learn and think for themselves, that they take care of the planet, and that they improve the world. I think this is relatively easy of what education should be. Now, the problem is that conventional schools, massive mandatory schools as we know them, it's a very imperfect technology and in many senses obstructs any of these 4 fundamental purposes. These 4 purposes, that kids, that they know each other, that they learn, that they take care of the planet and they improve the world. These are things that the conventional school historically has not been able to do right. And in many senses, they're hindering it. And there lies the challenge. If we want for education to be a vehicle for these purposes that I'm saying, we have to rethink very radically how we organize, how we think, and how we do things like teaching, school leadership, and education policy as a whole. School, as I was saying, it's an inadequate technology that actually is on the way of the purposes that I'm saying here, to rebuild the human project. And this is like this because historically, schools have not had the role of educating for this. Schools, we learn to be taught. That's what we learn at school. It's the universal experience of everybody that goes to school. In school, we learn to be taught. What's the meaning of this? We learn to obey. We learn to sit quiet and understand what the teacher is saying, to understand the expectations of authority of the teacher, the principal, the education system, and obey. It's a system, in words of Riane, at the beginning of this panel, of domination. We learn to be taught. We learn to obey. We learn to do what we're told to do. And the problem is that learning to be told, what you assume is to put the responsibility outside, to say what is truth, what is beautiful, to put this responsibility into your authority, your principal, your teacher, the Ministry of Education. That's learning to be taught. Learning to learn is the opposite. These are very different things because learning to learn assumes taking the responsibility, deciding according to your values or your knowledge, your wisdom, your intuition, what is truth or not, what's beautiful or not, what's good or not. learning is a practice of freedom. And if there's an idea I want to leave with you, it's that one. Learning is a practice of freedom. And as such, as practice of freedom, learning is absent in most of our schoolrooms and schools all over the world. If we want to change our education so that it becomes a vehicle to regenerate, recreate the human project, we need a cultural change that is deep and generalized. And as Riane was saying in her presentation, these are the social movements that have been historically the most powerful vehicles that we have for cultural transformation that is generalized. So we have to start thinking and acting on education change, enforcing this change as a social movement, as a vehicle of cultural change that transforms how we do work in our rooms, in our schools, all over the world. And good news is that this is not only theoretical. There are many examples, especially in Colombia, in India, in Egypt, in Mexico, examples of pedagogic renewal movements that have been able to change in the roots of the connection between teachers and students and release learning, and that cooperate as social movements. Now, let me just quickly say, if we want to release learning, we have to change the pedagogic nuclei. That is a connection between the one that teaches, the one that learns, and the world, or the object of knowledge. It's the connection between someone, the teacher, and student in presence of an object. Here, we're playing three very important things, and I will say it quickly because I know about times. Here, we have knowledge. Learning happens there. We play democracy as well, because in this basic connection between adults, teachers, and students, object of knowledge, there are relationships of power. If what we do is keeping these nuclei, as Jenny is saying properly, of domination, what we're cultivating is this mindset, these attitudes required for authoritarian regimes. For democracies, we need more horizontal things, care, respect, solidarity. In the pedagogic nuclei, there's democracy and well-being, because in relationships of domination, what produces is harm, angst, stress, a feeling of when you're not good enough, lack of self-esteem. In relationships of care, of dialogue, what you cultivate is a sense of well-being, that you matter, that you're at peace, that you're being seen, that you're loved. That produces well-being. So here we have the basic unit that we have to transform. And I love how Riane presents it. I don't know why we didn't meet before, but I need to read all your books. What we need is a pedagogic nuclei where the connection is not domination, but collaboration, partnership, as Riane is saying. This is what helps us to rebuild the human project through studying. What we need as a public policy is the type of efforts, of strategies that will make learning everybody's task. Schools, systems, schoolrooms, where learning is everybody's job. Learning is a visible public practice that happens in schoolrooms, in schools, in education systems as a whole. Now, let me close. And these ideas, I discuss them in my most recent book, Liberating Learning, Education Change as a Social Movement. Let me just close this presentation with a tweet that I loved from some years ago, the Stoic Emperor. What he says, I think, summarizes what the work has to do as in terms of education policy. And I think it's aimed and describes the nature and the challenge and the work we have ahead in these times where we're going through the abyss really fast. For over a century, Sapiens has tried to look like machines, has learned to be on time, has learned to repeat after the teacher, has learned to do repetitive things in a reliable manner. Machines are not better than Sapiens in being machines. Sapiens should relearn to be a human. That's what the work we have in front of us is about. Anything we do at any levels of the system, either in the education policy of our work with our students, at a school, it has to move us this way. And if it's not moving us here, by default, will be moving us to the abyss. What we have to relearn is to being human and put this in the focus of the work that we do at all levels, schoolroom, the schools, in school regions, school systems that are national and international networks as well. Thank you very much. And we're ready for the discussion. Thank you, Santiago, for sharing this exercise of convergence for this. And we thank you for adapting to the format that we gave you, that was summarizing. And it's not something small, because you could spend many hours presenting many things that you all have. So thank you very much for making an effort. So what we're doing right now is to present visually that since I'm a moderator, I also got a drawing. What I will ask is to change in my ID card. I want this one. So thank you, Sabrina Jauregui, who did this beautiful thing. Thank you, Sabrina, for being part of the team. And while we see the profile of this drawing, well, you don't see me, I will tell you that we will share a visual interface in which we have the contributions of the three speakers to close the first round. So you will be sharing the interface of Miro for this. Is it ready? Please put it, and I will tell you that from this interface from Miro, that you will see the contributions of the three of them. We found like
Me habilitas a compartir.
Perfecto.
Can you let me share? Yes, sure. Okay. So what we found from the three speakers is to take a proposal from Santiago that we put in the center, that is not adapting to what is coming later, but we have to think about the education policy, the public policy, the cultural policy, the tech policy after the pandemic as a specific ground for creation. So in this center is where we will start integrating the rest of contributions. It's not adapting to what's coming after the pandemic, but we have to think specifically a public policy after the pandemic. And this public policy, we understand that these three speakers give important keys to rebuild not only educating for what, but culture for what, tech for what, where we have to think about this new didactic triangle. We don't talk about the nuclei, we talk about this triangle that does the same roles. And within this education policy, everybody's commitment, because we realized something in the pandemic, that educators are fundamental, but also parents, families, societies contributed, that after the pandemic, it's not going back, that the one that teaches is the school, but this is everybody's ground that should be in freedom. Continuing the cycle of the three speakers, technology, as Carlos Casasus was saying, connectivity, it has to be transversal to all the public policies in whichever area. This transversality to discuss education. I'm sorry, I cannot. Now we're all muted. Thank you for letting me know. Okay, we're live. We're live. Technology, telecommunications, and think about it in this transversality where public policy has to be as a part of. And while there is true that the transformation that Carlos was mentioning, that telecom went from a public asset to a private one, we also realized of this thing that there are elements that should keep being a public interest and should be still be part of the state, of the government. So thinking a free internet for everybody has to be part of the regulations and something where we have to get to, not within some years, but very quickly, very soon. So which other elements did we find to go further in the public policy after the pandemic? Are other contributions from Riane Eisler regarding cultural transformation that, as she mentioned, there are 4 cornerstones connected to collaboration. This identifies us because we're a network of collaboration. And therefore, we're in that horizontal thing of relationships where Riane puts the 4 cornerstones connected to childhood, gender equality, to an economy of care that is ecological or green economy, as it is called, and the relationships of language in this new collaborative construction. Why? Because we need the 5 steps ahead of an economy. Public policy without thinking, economy is not public policy. So which are those keys that Riane is giving us to think, and more than thinking, acting around a public policy that is sustainable, okay? They're connected to the policies on how the metrics, or how we measure health regarding inclusion and care, policies that are connected to taking care of children, of youth, and also the different intergenerations that happen in a society. That's why it is necessary, as Riane is saying, to share proof that it is necessary to emphasize these different generations that support a healthy society, and a policy connected to a green economy that includes what has not been included so far. Is one of the issues mentioned by Riane, to take one step beyond. So with this, we're summarizing this. This will be available to everybody visually. We will share it so that you have access. And I'm sure after the Congress, we will enrich it with the contributions that will come up from the second round. That is the exchange between the speakers. In the third round, that's the audience connected here in the room and through the social media. So what I have to do now is to introduce and activate the second round. Now, we will have an exchange between Santiago Rincon, Riane Eisler, and Carlos Casasus, in that order. And what's the dynamics? I will ask a question to Santiago. I mean, I could ask a lot, but I will start with one question, and then Santiago will answer, and he will generate one question to Riane, and then Riane will answer and generate a question to Carlos. And from then we go to the third round with the audience. So I have to select a question. I'm in trouble, but I could ask you as advisor, as a consultant on education and innovation and public policies, which keys could be for education transformations? I will decide to ask you the other way around, because I think we have to think the other way around, not only outside the box, but also differently in this situation. from your experience connected especially to Latin American countries, also in a global sense, but especially to know because you know that the Latin American reality, to you, which are the keys or the characteristics that kill transformations and the reforms of public policies that are educational, that kill, that cut, or that could cut a public policy post-pandemic that is creative, free, as you're saying. Maybe we could start realizing what helps. Well, it's summarized in one word: schooling. That's what kills learning as we know it, schooling. Historically, the function of the education systems, the massive mandatory systems, is not learning and is not well-being of the kids. That's not the historic function of schooling as we know it. Historically, schools in massive school systems, mandatory systems, have had three parts. They've had three historic functions, three things that the school is designed to do and that they do relatively well and that they're still doing. These three things are custody, taking care of the kids while parents are working; control, school is a social control mechanism; and classification. School has become a mechanism to classify students according to certain criteria that are very arbitrary to decide who has access to which opportunities. That's what the school is designed to do, and that it does right. That's not the problem. The problem is that it works great to do what they were meant to do. So let me answer the other way around. What can help for learning and well-being of our kids to prosper in schools? And what we have to start by doing first is to define why we're educating for, what for. And I think the vision here that Riane is giving us that's the vision where we have to go for. It's a world of solidarity, love, care, people, the planet. That's what we want. We have to define it clearly. What we have to do is start defining very clear as much as possible how this looks like, how educating looks like, how is this nuclei in a system and in a society that actually wants to cultivate the future generations, people that know each other, that think for themselves, etc. We have to develop a vision of this nuclei. We have to define very clear as possible, how it looks in practice, how it's lived, how it is done. This thing of educating for partnership, for well-being of people and nature. And what we have to do is to generate in the education systems at all levels cultures of development and continuous learning. Education systems of the future, the ones that will work better, are the systems that learn, that constantly learn. It's not that we need the perfect model to start. We cannot have it. What we need to do is to start with our best version possible, what we know can work, test it, and refine it through time. Learn constantly. Systems, if we are to have a brighter future, these systems that we will have, schools that we will have, are systems and organizations that learn continuously and that are organized in a way that everything they do has an action theory behind that is clear, that allows anybody within the system to say, what's the strategy and how this thing that I'm doing at this level in the system affects the nuclei, how this decision that I'm making here looks in the day-to-day of the lives of students and teachers when they interact between each other. What we have to do are systems where care, love, collaboration, as Riane said so eloquently, to live them, that they are seen, that they are enforced in all levels, regardless of where you are, either in the classroom, school, in the education system. What we see are leaders that learn. We have said apprentice leaders, leaders that create conditions so that everybody learns, and they learn with them. what works. So I summarize it like this. As I said in my presentation, this is not just in theory. There are very good examples that have been generated globally of systems, of networks, of organizations that are working like this, and that have been operated as social movements. What they're doing is changing in the root the patterns of behavior, beliefs, relationships in the schoolrooms that have achieved it into scale and have also done it with great results, with very good results, especially in the marginalized areas in Mexico, Colombia, Uruguay. So it's not just a theory. We have examples that have been developed before the pandemic and where we have to learn from now. I think I need to ask a question to Riane, right? Okay, and let me just make a parenthesis, also as an answer to what Carlos is saying, his presentation. And what I want to bring here is how important will be the role of technology in the work ahead. And I think I agree. We have to think about connectivity as a public effort, as something that is done from the government. But again, this effort will be productive or destructive according to what we're educating for. So yes, connectivity, technology will have an important role, but by itself, it could destroy or build according to its purpose. So that's why the question of the purpose, what we educate for, has to be the focus of what we do. My question to Riane, I could ask 100 questions because of our presentation. And I have the titles of your books, Riane, and I will put them on the top of my things to read. The eloquence, the clarity on how you capture and how you're helping me to understand the work that I've been doing. It's something that I appreciate, that I thank you deeply for. And the question to you is, if you see currently in the world examples of societies, governments, organizations that are operating under your vision of the partnership model and not domination, and if you could tell us where they are, if we wanted to start seeing examples, illustrations on how this new mode of human relationship, of human organization, focus on collaboration more than domination, where are the bright spots? Where are the spaces where this is being done?
Thank you so much, Santiago. And I love your emphasis on care and on what are we educating for, because that is the basic question. And if we consider that our whole system, economics, everything else, came out of times that oriented more closely to the domination system, we really have to teach students how to understand our true history. I wrote a book. I'm going to go quickly to your question, but first I want to tell you about a book that I wrote on education called Tomorrow's Children, La Niñez de Mañana. Hasn't been translated, I wish it were, but it focuses on 3 elements of education. One is process, and I think that you have many, many examples today of schools that are really trying to have more of a partnership process. But there are 2 other elements of education that I think we cannot ignore. Content. We humans live by stories. Our language is so limiting, you know, the categories, as I mentioned, of our language channel our thinking, so it's almost impossible to see other alternatives. That's why I coined other words. And of course, there is structure. I present the school of the future as a community resource, as something not only for the children, but for the parents and for everybody else, a center of resources. So I just wanted to tell you about that. I will go to the state level. There are countries, there is movement. See, once we start really focusing on the basics, on the four cornerstones, we can see that there is movement towards the partnership side. And the countries that have incorporated this are Northern European countries like Finland, like Sweden, like Norway, like Denmark, are not only the happiest countries according to the World Happiness Reports. And I so agree with you about what is the purpose of education? Is it to help us realize our human potentials, our positive human potentials? Is it to help us recognize patterns? This is a quality that we must cultivate in students. But let me get back to these countries, because they approximate more. It's always a matter of degree, the partnership side rather than the domination side. They have more equality and democracy in both the family and the state. Two, they were in the forefront of the movements against abuse and violence. Not only the first peace studies, we had lots of war academies, right? But the first laws prohibiting, saying it's against the law to use physical discipline on children. Remember Mr. Putin and what he did. It makes sense. There is a connection between what happens and what children experience and observe. We know this from neuroscience. In my most recent book, Nurturing Our Humanity, really presents much of the neuroscience. They also, and this is very important, they have much more gender equity in both the family and the state. So much so that women are almost 50% of the national legislatures. And what happens, this is not a matter of women against men or men against women. The dynamics of domination and partnership systems are that as the status of women rises, and with it their public recognition, men no longer think it's such a threat to their identity, to their quote masculinity, to also embrace caring values. So these nations are in the forefront of universal health care, universal availability of high quality child care, very generous paid parental leave. In other words, caring policies, and they are not socialist. They have very healthy business communities precisely because they invest in what economists tell us is so important today, high quality human capital. Resilient, capable, creative people who can think for themselves rather than giving or taking orders. But there are trends all over the world towards, if you look at the four cornerstones, 50 other nations at least have on their books now laws saying, no, hitting a child, hurting a child, it is worse in many ways than hitting a stranger, for which you go to jail. I mean, we just have to understand this. Gender, women and men are trying to get rid of the gender stereotypes, that are like prisons,
right,
and move towards what does it mean to be human.
right.
There are many, many trends. But I'm supposed to stop talking, I think, and ask a question of Carlos, if I'm correct. So I will stop talking. And I want to say to Carlos that I absolutely agree with you that it is a public good. But again, I would like to ask you, how can you see incorporating the idea of education not for the world of the 1700s and 1800s or 1900s, but education for creativity, for pattern recognition, for flourishing, for caring. I mean, in my book, Tomorrow's Children, I say we should be taught caring for self, caring for others, and caring for nature as part of our education. And it's absent, isn't it? So that is my question. How do you see that being, because we have the technology, the question is how do we program it? What do we offer? We can't hear you.
Estás en mudo, Carlos.
Creo que mi primer pensamiento
My first thought is related to the education system of Mexico today. And unfortunately, I feel that it's unfortunately a very bad system. It has all the characteristics that we don't want from the system. We have this massification. You went from the first year to the second one, you have a degree as attorney that will do no good because you had to learn many things that are useless in the productive world. The system has the characteristics of massification that a public system necessarily has. And a good public system, as you were mentioning, in European countries, implies a culture of years, implies a system of politicians that are actually professional, that are people that providing public services, they do it with training, with technology to do this public good in an excellent manner. Unfortunately, in many of our countries, the education systems lack of all the problems of a poorly provided service. They respond to merely political conditions. And unfortunately, the values that they're including in the system translate into a society, in Mexico at least, that is in social conflict levels. So we have records of missing people, violence, and it's very sad. Let's say technology opens a small window of opportunity, and it does it in one regard. There's a possibility for all of our youngsters to learn what they actually need to learn, because there are more contexts, because there are more opportunities to find actually useful knowledge. And I think this is a great contradiction. Somehow we're saying that we need a better public education system, but we see a huge opportunity in private education, education of the groups that are trying to give ecologic knowledge, that they're free, they're in the network, and I can find a customized or individualized knowledge. And I think in these situations where political systems are breaking, or we have this horrible horribly divisive populism in our societies, civil society has to play a fundamental role, a key role in trying to do some things maybe online that could incorporate these values and that somehow we collectively can warn the population that there are education alternatives outside of the public system that don't work. And I think colleges could, the characteristics of our colleges that are less subject to the political issues, they preserve continuity in the creation of values and thinking that they're there to create a better society. Autonomy of colleges out of the political systems, that I think they should represent a fundamental value in creating this much more human focuses on education. This fantastic concern and how this dialogue has been made. Thank you. Thank you, because with these questions, this second round, after the presentations, I think this panel can surely be an aid for many people, many reference that work in the generation and the design of public policies currently. So hopefully it will help for this and to rethink about this situation after the pandemic in a creative manner and a realistic one. That's what we hope, that it works for the communities in Uruguay, in Mexico, Colombia, the different countries that participate in this Congress, and that also helps others, because I think we mentioned fundamental keys to think today, not only post-pandemic, but the current crisis that we already had before the pandemic regarding the environment and so on. So now let's open the third and last round of this panel with the audience, with questions, with comments. So we invite you, if you're here in the room, Zoom, in this virtual space, to generate your questions. Of course, while we give you a few minutes to type them, or we can also open the mics if someone prefers. Tell us on the chat and we'll open. But I will tell you about some interventions. In the case of YouTube, the public channel, Cultural, Rufino Cruz waves and says, thank you for this space of reflection. Pablo Ols is also thanking, and especially is thanking for the space that invites for reflection. Ana dos Santos says, great presentation by Santiago Rincon, and others are also thanking Riane and Carlos Casasus for their multiple perspectives. Here, Yolanda through the chat, Yolanda Campos is thanking the work of Casasus and for extending possibilities. Actually, this proposal and the different works of Anilla Cultural have been collaborations that are transnational and that have generated the possibility of joint work. If I may, I will mention some other comments. For example, Mariel Sindero Lopez is saying, very promising, and she's very happy to receive this proposal. And I'm thinking that right now, it's a relationship between peers as a start point of these decisive works. Work in peers as a possibility to start collaboration. Also for Santiago Rincon, Yolanda Campos is saying she's very happy to see this proposal from UNESCO about the pillars of education that has a treasure like learning to do, learning to live with others and with the environment, learning to learn and learning to know. Those are the pillars of UNESCO for education in the 21st century. So let's continue receiving your comments. We can give you a few minutes, and if it's okay with you, while you type on the chat, we can have another exchange with you. That Santiago, you didn't ask Carlos, Carlos, you didn't ask Santiago, and vice versa, Riane. Crossing dialogues between the ones that haven't with the speakers. General questions. Yes, if I may, I want to tell Riane and Carlos as well, and I just wanted to start, as Riane was saying, about the connection or the relationship you can start seeing between how a society and a state operates and how the family operates. And it seems, and it's an image that I've used recently, a metaphor that I used recently. It's a metaphor of fractal. I have my major in math. These are the geometric figures that regardless if you zoom in or zoom out, they keep the same shape. And it seems like right now societies work as fractal societies in the sense of what is happening in the micro is also in the macro. So in times when connectivity is so extended, although there's still a lot to do, as Carlos was saying, actions above in an education system, what actions on top affect the more intimate systems, the ones below. And I like to think that it's also the case the other way around. What we do in micro also affects macro. It's bringing again this concept of feminism that is political, that intimate relationships, the day-to-day relationships are also political, and that can help to regenerate as well systems as a whole. That's what I wanted to mention. I love what you're saying, Riane, on the light over the Nordic countries, Finland and so on. If we see some of their systems that have been more celebrated, Finland is one of them. And part of it is that it's because the kids have a lot of opportunity to play. They don't get formal instruction until they're 7 years old. They have more flexibility to use their day every day. They use time to be outside, to play without structure. And they're great, even in terms of standardized tests. So they're able to do both things. I think we have to pay attention to some efforts in Latin America that I think are moving towards the types of societies that Diana is saying. One of them is Chile. Chile is going through a reinvention process that is very promising, very complex, and with many conflicts, but they have created a new constitution through a very democratic process with a convention designed to have gender equality. Half of the convention were women and half were men. And what was very interesting is seeing that this was the rule since the beginning, that it had to be the same amount of men and women in the Constitutional Convention. But the result after the election processes of the representatives is that if this rule hadn't been set, there would have been many more women than men. So this shows a very important change to the role of women in the decision making and in the redefining of how Chile will operate as a society. The fact that it's Chile is also interesting because Chile has been the space where the neoliberal project has been experienced more with the Pinochet project and others. So it has been the country that has reacted faster, that has felt more the negative effects of the domination that has been a part of capitalism. But it has a new president that was a student leader in one of the most inspiring movements over the last decades in Chile. And one of these people were also student leaders. So they have great energy. I think it's a country that we should pay attention to. Another one is Uruguay. And I connect this to connectivity that Carlos is saying. Ceibal plan in Uruguay started as an effort to extend connectivity to all communities in the country, of all communities in Uruguay, especially emphasizing the most marginalized communities. So Uruguay has the best connectivity in Latin America, and maybe the world. The level of connectivity they have is extraordinary, but something that has been great in Ceibal is that they started being an initiative of expansion, of connectivity, and now they're moving to pedagogic change, and they're using this as their moving force, changing what happens in pedagogy and using technology as something that helps, that accelerates, that helps good learning. So the driver, it's not technology. Technology is serving a much more interesting effort. I don't know if I could ask a question, but this comment hopefully helped. So, I want to try to speak Spanish. I don't have the vocabulary, but I wanted to offer you with some help of our foundation in the partnership systems help. We're developing what we call the partnership technology toolkit. And I would like to send it to you because the question, and as Carlos said, as you're saying as well, Santiago, education for what? For what? For humans, or to be humans, because that's the definition of a human being, right? And this technology toolkit, maybe you can use it, but if you give me your address, your email address, I'll send it to you. The second thing I want to say is that it's a joy for me to hear the voices of sanity, of Carlos, Santiago, and thank you very much to Delma for including me in all of this. And I'm sorry, my Spanish is terrible. No, it's extraordinary, Riane. Thank you very much, Riane, and gladly, of course, we always interconnect our speakers. So you will be in contact with everybody, and also we offer, especially to share with the different networks, this toolbox, this technological toolbox for collaboration. That's what you were saying. And there's a question to you, Riane, from Ana Maria, that is thanking all the speakers, but it's asking you, which strategies or tools can be used to generate positive changes in education in Latin American communities, obviously from your perspective. Greetings and thank you again. So there's a question, and let's continue with the interventions of the audience. And also let's continue with the conversation between you. Can you answer, please? I'll try to answer in English.
I will answer in English because my speaking is so limited. I think that there are many, many efforts. Latin America, as Santiago said, in Chile in particular, but in Mexico, in everywhere, focusing on process, how we teach, how we learn. But I think it's very important to focus on what do we learn? What are we teaching about our past? The stories that we know about our past are false. You know, that for millions of years, and we have the evidence from archaeology, from mythology, from DNA studies even. Millions of years we built cultures, we built societies that orient more to the partnership side, that were more gender balanced, that were, I mean, warfare, we know from archaeology is at most, that warfare is at most 5 to 10,000 years old. And yet children are still being taught that war is just human nature, and not only that, we idealize who won, who lost. It doesn't make any sense. Instead of focusing on the care, on the things that matter to us, that both GDP and GNP consider externality. Which is crazy. I mean, the whole system in Cáliz y Espada, in the Chalice of the Blade, I have 2 chapters on reality stood on its head, on the two chapters on how remything really stood reality upside down. And our job now is to create a that is more realistic, to stand reality right side up. And I think that, you know, I'm listening to the translation. It's very strange.
Yes, no, Riane, can you check if you have selected the English channel? Because it's at the same time, we are hearing the English channel and
and I'm hearing
and Spanish.
Ay.
But
well, I don't know what I did here. Oh, Spanish and
that doesn't matter. Just only you can select the English channel in your interpretation button.
I just did, but I want to say about your question, we have to raise our voices, and we have to raise them both on the ground, wherever we are. We have to change the conversation. Change the conversation. So that we really start talking about what we are teaching, not only how we are teaching, but what we are teaching. What kind of world do we want? What is our project? What is our project for planet Earth? And also, if you have contacts with government officials, they know that the old systems are not resilient, that they are crumbling. They are looking for other alternatives. And as Einstein said, we cannot solve problems with the same thinking that created them. We need the new language of partnership systems and domination systems.
Gracias, Riane.
Thank you, Riane. I think in this construction of dialogues, we can think what kills education transformation, the possible transformations post-pandemic, and the absence of dialogue. Maybe that would be one of the biggest keys to think from everybody involved. When there's no absence of dialogue or that is biased. So I think there's an important element that Riane has said. Thank you, Riane. Let's go to a question for Santiago Rincon that says, could we think that the pandemic confirmed that we should rethink how to instrument schooling? This understood as the aspect that Santiago was mentioning, the thing that kills freedom of learning. Well, it's a question that is open now. Schooling as we know it, using the framework used by Riane to talk about the types of systems that we have, technology by itself is neutral. It's not good or bad. It depends on what we use it for. And same thing with science, same thing with almost all human activities. It depends on what's the purpose. The thing on how we instrument education is, again, it's not so much a problem to me on what we're educating for. I think that's the question we should answer first. And what is clear to us that we want to educate to rebuild the human system, to have societies, government, states, citizens where care, love, compassion are what move us. Then let's think about how to restructure it. Let's think about how we use technologies, how we use infrastructure to sustain and to support instead of being on the way of growth of the human project that is coming. How we instrument it? Well, again, and I take this from what Diana was saying in the beginning, the how, the mechanism for how to do it. We have a lot to learn from the social movements. Historically speaking, social movements have been the vehicles that humankind has used to transform culture and to transform language and to transform social relationship patterns that are dominating. So what we have to start doing is thinking that our role as policymakers, as analysts, as educators, is to catalyze, support, sustain social movements focused on transforming what is happening in the pedagogic nuclei at macro and micro level, both or levels. But starting to think that our role is not so much scientific managers, people that will organize a very controlled plan that is coming from top with external incentives to make sure that the execution is right. What we need is being part of a movement. Social movement is progressists. What they do is transform the school culture so that it's a culture focused on love, solidarity, collaboration, compassion, not in domination. And this will take a lot of work because it requires changing this school culture, this conventional, will have it ingrained. It has been part of how we grew up. It's ingrained in all of us, and we have to be alert on this. In terms of how to form teachers, I see someone was asking how to teach people from the old system. The most powerful tool that we saw working is that teachers have learning experiences by themselves, creating opportunities so that teachers learning in new ways, powerful tools, transforming, releasing ways, that they live the education that we want, that they want with kids as well. And this is very releasing and very motivating when we take in our hands the responsibility of becoming students and learning through life things that we would think we couldn't learn. This generates great energy, and this also generates enthusiasm and will to do things. If we want for the kids to start learning other things in new ways, we as grown-ups have to learn other things in new ways, and doing this, all of us, we're learning new things, new contents, and we're learning in new ways, and we do it at the eyes of our kids. And I think that's the best thing we can do, regardless if we're policymakers, school principals, school supervisors, or teachers. Learning has to be everybody's task. There's a question that can be answered by the three of you. So if it's okay with you, we'll give you option. Carlos Rodriguez is asking, how can we take collaboration to be promoted in schoolrooms to the platforms that we use for distance teaching? The three of you have a lot of experience in collaboration, so you can all answer giving your comments. How can we take collaboration to the platforms that we use for distance education? Go ahead.
Do you want me to start? I can just briefly
Go ahead. Go ahead.
If you go to centerforpartnership.org, you will find a learning platform. And there is an online course called Changing Our Story, Changing Our Lives. And you can get that. It consists of 4 videos. How did we get, where are we? The second one is, how did we get here? The third is really about who are we? Has a lot of evidence from neuroscience. And the fourth is, where do we go from here? Which focuses on the 4 cornerstones. And I think that you can incorporate that. You can use the materials in your classes. So to answer your question, our resources are there for you to use. You may want to take this course, I think, yourself, but I also think that you can incorporate whatever, translate whatever. Let us know what you translate, because we would like to feature it. We have a Spanish section, an Italian section. That is what I wanted to say. There are lots of resources, and I have been teaching courses on cultural transformation. So I do consulting and I do also teach. But the website is a good resource. And I want to say that I am hopeful that Carlos and also Santiago, that you will be able to use some of this and translate it. And also that the technology, the partnership technology toolkit will be a good resource.
Un pensamiento.
One very quick idea. In the national networks of investigation research, we believe that one of the tools to improve education, higher education in general, is organizing the repositories of learning objects. There are very valuable efforts, like the college network at UNAM that has over 22,000 education resources that are open all of them licensed by Creative Commons, that are linked to study plans and learning objectives, that I think it's a very valuable effort because it's there. But I would like to say how we can influence for this more humanistic vision to be incorporated to these repositories. And I think one of the biggest characteristics is that you have the possibility to make comments as a teacher or as a user about the quality of the education content and give 5 stars, 4 stars, 3 stars. I think these community efforts, maybe we can contribute with our part, emphasizing the education contents that go with a more humanistic vision and that help us to say, here we're transmitting knowledge that will help me for Santiago's 4 objectives: to know myself, to help my community, to feel closer to my neighbor. It's just a contribution, but it's something that we can do in all of these efforts of the education repositories, thinking that when we have control or the possibility to upload materials into the network, let's not just upload anything. Let's upload quality material in this regard, humanistic material with quality. Thank you very much, Carlos. And if I may, as Carlos and Riane has said, I want to talk about collaboration. It's not easy. Collaborating right is not easy. We have many things that we call professional learning communities, things that where collaboration is achieving a lot. You cannot collaborate to do harm. So the why, I will not repeat it because I've said it. That has to be in the core. The second is part of the work of collaboration is less technological than cultural. It's a matter of starting to understand how we collaborate in an efficient manner and learning to do it with our colleagues. Having a clear purpose helps. Having emphasis on doing more than just knowing. Having a joint project where we're doing joint work. And so we use collaboration tools to contribute. I think that's what we can think. What we have to clarify is how effective collaboration looks like, how this happens, and then use technologies to enable it. We have an article that I wrote with Michael Fuller 3 years ago, more or less, like 5-6 years ago, called Essential Aspects of Effective Collaboration in Networks. And we think that it covers the 7 or 8 characteristics of the networks of schools, school systems that are working properly, that are producing improvements in learning, the culture of learning of schools. We can share that, of course, with the organizers and have it available for all the participants. But what I wanted to say is digital platforms, internet connectivity, we have to use it not just to continue with what we have, but to expand its possibilities. What connectivity offers or to our kids is access to experts anywhere in the world. We could, if a child is interested in space or in astronauts, they could contact experts in NASA and talk to them talk about their projects, ideas, video game designers, people in ecology, the openness to contents that is not only written or produced, or expertise, international experts that children care about. That's a great possibility. And the other, this we get very nice efforts for students start using platforms to make public what they produce. When the children know they will produce something that the world will see, they put a lot more effort, because it's not just for the kid to see it and give them a grade. The world will see it. So we have to think about the possibilities of technology connectivity, not only to continue with the collaboration, but to expand its potential, especially when we pay more emphasis in our purpose, why we're educating for. Once this is clear, we use technologies not only to continue or to keep doing what we have been doing, but to expand, to accelerate good learning, human development, etc. Thank you. We have about 4 minutes. So what I will ask you is this: for all of you to close with 1 minute and a final message regarding your perspective and sharing the vision that you have of this interchange, and a message to the audience. We will share with the speakers all the chat and the interventions so that you can answer after this panel and after the Congress, and generate through our list of records of different exchanges and so on. And let's welcome Riane to this network of collaboration to keep working together. Santiago, we've met. Casasus is from home. Welcome, Riane, because I'm sure we'll be able to generate more synergies with you, with your legacy, with your center. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. Thank
all of you.
And I have 1 minute, and I just want to say, I think together we can make change. That's the only way. And it was usually a small, unpopular group of people that created all the changes that we today enjoy. But as Santiago said, social movements flourish only when people first educate themselves, change their own consciousness. And so I invite you, I've put in the centerforpartnership.org as a resource for you. And I really, really thank all of you. It's been a pleasure to meet Carlos and to meet Santiago. And thank you. Muchas gracias.
Si quieres, tomo yo
Then I'll be next, and let Santiago to close. The public and private. It's a border that is gray and gray. There's nothing completely public or completely private. I think private entities have a responsibility to act in the public, even if we're not government. And the private ones will create public policies without being the government. And we will create them, as Riane is saying, working together and collaborating. And I'm a believer that we're good humans. And we will achieve a lot. Collaboration, domination, control, freedom, dehumanizing, humanizing. These are the dilemmas that we currently have. And let me put it, learning is an act of freedom. School, as we know it, is a control mechanism of domination. And what we have to do is to make sure that in the day-to-day work and that what we're doing, we select which project we're betting on. And I believe that we have to bet on the human project. It's in danger. We're on the way of catastrophe. And what better way than working together, reorganize each other, rethink priorities, and move forward with being brave, being strong, with hope. The dark times are coming ahead. So we need to work to live with a better world than the one we had. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Santiago, Carlos, Casasus, Riane. So let's start by releasing collaboration so that we can learn, release in education and culture. Thank you all for starting this Congress with an amazing panel. That's how the audience have said it in different chats that we have massively received. So very happy. We say, let's continue collaborating and let's keep enjoying the Congress and let's move ahead for a better society. Thank you all. Thank you to the organizing team. We have a break, a 30-minute break, and we'll be back at 2:30 Montevideo time, and we'll start the next panel. So we invite you, we'll keep connected. If you're here, see you next time. Thank you all. Take care. The polls, we have to present the polls for the audience. Thanks, Veronica, for letting me, for telling me. And thank you all for the participation. Thank you for reminding me. Okay, so you have the poll. So thank you. We would appreciate it if you could take 1 minute to answering these questions, because they're also part of the contributions. Remember that all the inputs that you generate here will be added to the summary. So we thank you if you're willing to keep collaborating.
Me voy a despedir. I'm going to say bye. Riane, such a pleasure to meet you, Carlos. Un gran placer conocerte. Estemos en comunicación. Creo que hay mucho.
We'll be in touch. I think we have a lot to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Wonderful to hear you and to meet you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Riane, for joining us. Gracias, Carlos. Gracias a la interpretación, Angélica Domínguez, muchísimas gracias, excelente realmente tu trabajo. Gracias. Gracias a ti, seguimos en contacto, gracias. Hasta pronto. Bien, dejamos entonces una pausa de 30 minutos, nos podemos quedar conectados o volver a conectar cuando sea el momento. Gracias por estar. Voy a detener la votación, así que si alguno precisa un ratito más, doy unos segunditos. Así que más o menos en unos segundos estoy deteniendo la votación. Gracias.